Ladies and gentlemen, program starts in 1 minute. Ladies and gentlemen, program starts in 1 minute.
Donde todos somos como hermanos, así es Medellín. Medellín, flor de primavera, eres la primera, lo puedo decir. Mi Medellín,
Medellín, brillante lucero, tu nombre llegó al mundo entero. Medellín, brillante lucero, tu nombre llegó al mundo entero.
ay, qué feliz me siento cuando escucho a mi gente contar remembranzas que no olvidarán, forman parte de su identidad. Medellín, qué hermoso tú eres, todas tus mujeres son dignas de ti. Medellín, si lejos me encuentro, mi corazón necio se quiere salir.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the final session of day one of our World Circular Economy Forum here in the wonderful Finlandia Hall in Helsinki. Welcome also to those around the globe who are watching in on the webcast. Our session this afternoon is under the title Building an Enabling Environment for Circular Businesses. Our drive is very much about how do we create that environment within which the transition to circularity can take place. And I'm delighted I'm joined this afternoon by Ligia Nerona from the United Nations Environment Programme. And you're part of the architecture of this session, so maybe a word or two about what we have in store.
Thank you very much, Peter, and welcome on my behalf and on behalf of UN Environment for this session, which is a session which is trying to take us a little deeper into this whole discussion. We all know why we're here. We know why circularity is important. We have been discussing intensively now on the ideas of urgency and action. We saw a lot of young people this morning making the case for why circularity needs to be addressed, why climate action is so important, and there are strong connections between circular economies and climate. So what we want to do in this session is really to unpack this a bit more and try to understand what does it mean to have circular businesses? What kind of environment do we need for circular businesses to actually move away from the take, make, dispose economies and become more circular? What does it mean in terms of converting the resources that we have been using over time into these perpetual assets that we need, which could very much help future generations find greater job opportunities, but also job opportunities today? So this session is really about bringing in the science, which we know has been talking a lot about the need for circularity and the need for resource efficiency, together with all the economic opportunity reports that we have already seen coming out of various foundations, private sector associations, etc. And then take this forward and say, okay, where is the appetite for this? Where are the political leaders? Where are the finance leaders to make this into a reality? And then we speak a lot here in this session, I hope, on how to create a fair and enabling environment for circular businesses. What do we mean by this? How do we ensure that we have a participation of different businesses in circularity? How do we ensure that we do not leave some behind? How do we ensure that the transition is a fair transition? How do we ensure that we do not move into a new world of first-class consumers and second-hand consumers, but that we really and truly move away from a linear model which has not been very equitable into a circular model which we hope can be more equitable? So we want to include these ideas of equity and ideas of for greater inclusiveness right in the beginning of our thinking on circularity. And this is what this particular session is going to focus on. And to lead us through this, we have some really good and great speakers. We will have the Vice Minister of Environment of Peru, Ms. Albina Ruiz, who will speak from her experience and the work she's doing. We will have Jana Tuminen, the CEO of Fiskas, Zinat Nyatsi, the Vice President of Development Alternatives from India, the Governor of the Bank of Finland, Mr. Olli Rehn, and we have Peter Barker, the President of the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. After we finish with these speakers, we will invite comments from two individuals, from two organizations that have been very important for putting circularity into the mainstream. We have Jocelyn Blériot from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and we have Yanis Potočnik from the UNEP International Resources Panel, the co-chair. And they will comment on what we already have from the speakers, but we'll also open the conversation with the other speakers on the panel. So with this, let me turn over to you, Peter, to explain the next steps in this session.
Yes, well, an exciting session ahead. What we want to do is one thing, is to really just get you involved for a moment, particularly with your thoughts. And we've got a question for you which we'd like you to respond to on your app. So you now have permission to get your mobile phones out of your pockets. I know 80% of them already were out. And we've got a question for you. So if we could have the question up on the screen. It's, We'd just like to know, what should a fair and enabling environment for circular businesses look like? Okay? So I think we may have all different interpretations of that. What should a fair and enabling environment for circular businesses look like? Okay, now, you could write an essay on this, but what we want you to do is to go to the app. Well, I love these graphics, and don't get too frightened by it. Somewhere on there you will find a thing that says message wall, okay? Push on message wall. And then that will take you to another screen which says word cloud. So what we'd like you to do is push word cloud. Oh no, sorry, I'm going to take you backwards. Go backwards, I've ruined it. Message, you're going to go which hall? Hang on a minute. These things are sensed defeat me. Oh, hang on, program. I'll get there at the end. I tell you. Okay. Oh, I've been practicing this all afternoon, and now I've had a complete blank on how to make this work. So I'd go to, hang on, message wall. That's right. And then you can, there we are, and it's got the question, what should a fair and enabling environment for circular businesses look like? And we'd like you to just write something of a maximum of 3 words, okay? Keep it clean. Please describe in a maximum 3 words. What would the most powerful thing you could say, and in a moment that's going to come up as a word cloud up here. So there you are. So there is, as soon as you've written your 3 words, then send them, okay? Okay. I was worried that we were going to have 2,000 words because you all had a different idea. Okay. So now what you can do is see what's emerging here, and you can have another go. So you can either think, I really like that, I want to make that bigger, so you can repeat one of the words here, and you can then send it. Okay, so you could say, oh, I like brave, so I'm going to tap in brave and send, and that will make that bigger. Or you can come up with something completely fresh all again. Okay, so second round, and it's like a Eurovision scoreboard. It's continually updating. Heterarchy, we'll see how big that gets in the end. Okay. So keep going just for a moment. Lovely. Okay. And what you can do is actually have a third round, because it's generosity is our nature. So you can tap in again. So either something fresh that you think you should be up there, or you can add value to something that's already there. And if you've submitted something with a spelling mistake, I'm afraid that's the way life is.
It's funny, but it's
okay.
Yeah.
So here we are, some interesting ones here. I wonder, Ligia, I wonder whether this is what you says. There we are. We've got
cooperative, inclusive, open, collaborative, transparent, and sharing. Regulated, predictable. These seem to be the biggest ones that I can see.
Yep.
So I think that's great. We're now going to invite our speakers to speak to what they would like to share with you, but also to speak to some of these key ideas that have come up from all of you, which we think are very important in the context of this discussion. Thank you, Peter.
Wonderful. I'll come this side, and I think you're going that side.
So we're trying to be gender balanced here, so I'm going this way. So we have a true representation here. So let me start with Albina Ruiz, the Vice Minister of Environment for Peru. Vice Minister, what do you think of all of these words, and what do you think is important from your perspective in the context of setting up a fair and enabling environment for businesses?
Yeah, for us, it's the transparency. Now we're talking about this all the time we're talking about the transparency. In Peru, as well as in the world, there is a growing demand for raw materials and energy as a result of greater urbanization, population growth, and consumption patterns. Our country also has an important natural heritage that is put at risk in the face of the impact of conventional production and consumption flows. Today, the country is committed to initiating a transition to the circular economy, and the Ministry of the Environmental enjoying work with the production minister and the Ministry of Economy and Finance promote this process that, although it is recent, is part of the policies of the state for several years, which allow us to face the challenge and offer us opportunity to reduce the impacts and in turn promote the development of innovation, new businesses, and change in the behavior of people. During 2017, the Integral Solid Waste Management Law was implemented, which recognized the circular economy as a principle in the integral solid waste management. To promote that products and material obtain the longest possible time in their life cycle and that post-consumption generates less waste. The law also promotes clean production agreements that consist of voluntary commitments from the private sector to minimize the generation of waste, reuse, and recycling. Today, we have two signed APLs, one with Coca-Cola and Arca Continental Inlet during 2018, and with the Union of Peruvian Brewery Bacchus & Johnson, that is a part of the multinational AB InBev in 2019, the world's largest beer manufacturer, and both leading the company in the national beverage market. Last December, the Congress of the Republic approved the law that regulates single-use plastic and disposable containers. This law prohibits gradually the use of bags, straw, and technopore, and requires to include 15% of recycling PET in the composition of the plastic bottle, and with the aim of making recycling a profitable activity for the companies, promote valuation, and reduce negative impact on health and the environmental. The regulation of the law is being built through a participatory process and with the support of different actors of the state, companies, and civil society. In parallel with this policy, the Minister of Economy and Finance approved a national policy on competitiveness and productivity, which include the circular economy within priority objectives in line with the vision of the strengthening the institutional framework to generate the conditions for the transition to a circular economy oriented towards the production and infrastructure of sustainable production, sustainable consumption, public procurements with sustainability criteria, and the promotion of public and private investment of the valorization and disposal of solid waste. In this line, the main space in Peru have been convened to raise awareness among political actors, companies, and civil society about the circular economy models. The first Circular Economy Forum, organized in 2019 by Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Production, the European Union, and the UNIDO. Our country has also been working on the promotion of electricity mobility to reduce CO2 emissions, the use of solar panels that save electricity, as well as the reduce of solid waste. The technical support of the European Union and UNIDO has been of crucial importance for our country in this state's effort to move towards a circular economy, and that must be implemented in public institutions, company, financial institutions, civil society, and citizens. Finally, the achievement of the country in terms of the circular economy we will give at the productivity sectors companies many of the foreign investment. New ventures and citizenship in general incorporate this component as part of their process and in their usual practice, specifying the economic and environmental benefits that allow to give sustainability to these improvement decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
On time.
And it's very interesting to hear different country experiences of what your priorities are and what you are beginning to put in place. And clearly, frameworks are different, related to different stages of development and particular needs. We're going to move on now and look at the sharp end of things, very much from the business perspective of those businesses who are now making efforts to transition towards a circular economy. And delighted we're joined this afternoon by Marjaana Tuominen, who's the Group President and CEO of Fiskar, a major Finnish consumer goods company. So you are right there trying to work out, respond to customer needs, but also do the right thing, as suddenly we realize the right thing is changing. So very interested to hear something of your story about how you're responding to the circular economy challenge, but also what that enabling environment that allows you to do the right thing at the right pace.
Thanks, Peter. It's really nice to be here and see all the people interested in circular economy. And we at Fiskars Group we have been exploring the ideas for quite a while already. And I would say that maybe the last 12 months it's been quite intense. And if we have learned something, so even though we've been working on it, so we somewhere really, you can barely see it. It's really in the start phase. But it's clear that there's a lot of opportunities and challenges around us. It would be easy from the business point of view, think that as a threat. We are in the linear business model, no question about it. I think the one thing we've learned that we can't continue the way it is today. So clearly, whatever we must do for today, it has an impact for future, not only next year, next decade, but even next century. The company I work for is in a very lucky position. We've been around 370 years, so it's a pretty big anniversary this year. And if you think all of the brands that we have and count the age of those together, that's almost 3,000 years. So I would claim that there's some kind of DNA in this company understanding what it takes to have a sustainable business. And this is why why I'm here today, understanding that we need to do again things differently in order to survive the next 370 years. And the company's purpose is making the everyday extraordinary. And there's no way of living that purpose without understanding what everyday looks like and what makes it extraordinary. And the everyday of today is definitely changing. You've heard quite a few talks today about it, and you can see from the younger generation, especially, that the change is required from every one of us. So that's really the starting point for us, how to make the everyday extraordinary. One of the things, very concrete, and I'm kind of go to the example pretty directly here, is that of all these, actually I think it was 170 ideas what we could do in the circular economy, how to change the way of making, doing our business, how to make the everyday extraordinary. One is now launched. We call it vintage service. So in Finland, you can today sell and buy previously used Arabia Iittala branded tableware. So we're actually taking the next step. It's not only when you've done with the product, come back to it with us. We either buy it and then sell it again, or if it's not sellable, we actually take care of the recycling for you. And it sounds simple, but it's not as easy as it might be, and that's where we come to the enabling part of it. It was actually easy to do it in Finland, And we are now expanding this year in pretty much every single store that we have in Finland. But obviously that's not enough. We operate in 30 countries. We have selling our products in more than 100 countries. This cannot be a Finland issue and a Finland initiative. So really the key challenge at the moment is how to make it global. How do you scale a locally successful solution? We've been lucky when we started in here. In Finland, actually, it was pretty easy. There was no really roadblocks from taxation or legislation point of view, but that's not the case in the global world, so to say. So that's definitely one of the enablers that we need to have a legislation, taxation that supports the new ideas. And we all know the society is built for linear models, so there's a certain inertia, I guess, in the legislation that might be one of the roadblocks or enabler to remove those would be one of the things. The other thing I would like to mention as an enabler is the biggest word on that cloud. It was collaboration. None of us can do this alone. This is not about business. It's not about the society. It's not about the individuals of us. We all are needed. I could tell examples, and maybe we have time. We maybe have time later what it might be in different parts of the world, but kind of enablers, it's the collaboration, and it's the speed and flexibility in the legislation part of it. So those would be my main kind of points here. And it's good to remember that none of us thinks ourselves as consumers. We use the products, and now even increasing rate, we share them, we rent them, we recycle them. So consumption, consumer, consuming are words that are pretty much not existing in the consumer business that I represent.
What word are you using now instead?
That's the problem. I've been asking my colleagues, but we just talk about people, it's us.
We should maybe set a word cloud challenge for the participants, for the new word for consumer.
Yeah.
I would be happy. If you get that, tell me.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Jana. And what we see here is how the values of the company are also driving the new value propositions, which is very interesting. So even if Finland already has some systems in place to support regulation, there's also a lot of drive coming in from the company itself in repositioning itself in terms of circularity. And I think that's an important message that you're giving. And the second important message is what you just talked about, the importance of looking at it as an ecosystem and looking at collaboration across the different actors. So that's key. But that takes me to Zinat, who is Vice President of Development Alternatives in India. And Zinat, you've been working on ecosystems around buildings and construction, and a lot with the small and medium-scale enterprises. So what do you see as important facts of the system that need to be changed to enable circularity in this sector?
Yeah, thank you, Legia. I'll start a little bit from the starting. So we agreed and we heard in the morning that we are looking at the twin objectives of prosperity for all within planetary boundaries, which means that we are looking at solutions that are not only green and circular, but that are also equitable. We saw that in the cloud as well, and inclusive. And that's where really we are looking at not just resource conserving low carbon solutions, but we are looking, especially in the context of the country I come from, most of the developing countries actually in Asia, Africa, that they are also job creating. And that's really where the small and medium enterprises come in. And how do we direct resource efficiency, greener, cleaner innovation right down to these small-scale industries? And I'd rather call them local green enterprises. This is because they need to be green, but they need to be localized. And we know for sure now that they give fantastic social returns. The jobs per dollar invested, you have huge benefits there. You have local economy contributions. You have contributions that enable people to be able to raise their level of purchasing power. Also, affordable products and services that can go to the market and people can use, not consume. But then the challenges that these local green enterprises face, we see them because we've been working with them for now over 30 years, is associated with their scale, is associated with their ability to capture markets access information, access technical know-how, and financing. With respect to becoming green and circular, they require technology, technical know-how, and the facilitation to be linked with different resource flows and different value chains. And that's really what small green enterprises are looking for. Our own experiences within the construction sector in India, it provides quite a few insights. A large number of technology options that we have innovated in development alternatives that use industrial waste, for example, to produce masonry blocks, or that use stone dust, which is aggregate waste, coming out into roofing systems. These are all amenable to being produced locally at smaller scales and being consumed by people on the ground. But what we do see that they face, and I'll sort of put down the 6 or 7 things that I feel that these enterprises need if they have to be sustainable and if they have to provide both the green and inclusive impact results. One is information services. We spoke about that a little bit, about trends, about new technology development. Besides the fact that they want to know about what kind of finances and where they're available, they also need platforms where they can connect with other small entrepreneurs, where they are able to then form a block and advocate for their case. And those kind of support services are not really available for small entrepreneurs. They need market development support for sure. And we realize that, with the economies of scale, it's very difficult to compete with the brown economy. And so they require a level playing field. And we saw that also in the cloud. And so, we need some kind of fiscal supports for them. We need aggregation of both demand and supply. So some kind of a franchised, locally connected market model is what we are looking at. We have found, we see the potential of public procurement here, enabling that issue that can actually lead to increasing trust amongst consumers in the products that the small entrepreneurs provide. Which leads me to the next point, which is the support for quality enhancement. So again, small entrepreneurs are unable to invest in that, and it would be useful to have a system that provides them standards and support system for quality enhancement, and of course, affordable finance. Finally, I think what really is needed from the government's end, or from the other businesses' end, and the R&D end, is directing technology R&D to the small scale. We've been doing a lot of research and support of whether it's market model innovation, whether it's technical innovation at the large industry. How do we direct that to the small scale? I'll just end with a very small example, and I'm going to pick up the word that you also picked up, collaboration. And collaboration as a business model we saw an example in India of something that we've called now a green building center. The building center movement is really it's an institutional framework where you have small entrepreneurs come together, produce materials, and supply to the local market. Here, this movement came about in the 1990s in India, failed because of the governance model of the institution. It is active in some parts of the country. But what we did see it picking up is a relationship between one of the largest cement manufacturers in India and small-scale prefabricated material producers. And you now have a situation where the small-scale entrepreneur is able to benefit from the quality, brand value, credibility that the large industry brings, also the information system, but has a very strong stake and therefore gets profits also. So the small entrepreneur is really included in this value chain. Truly included in that. So, we can talk a little bit more about it, but I think that's really the case. How do you collaborate the big and the small, coming together where there's a win-win for all the stakeholders concerned?
Wonderful, thank you.
And it's very interesting, because quite often we just think about the larger businesses with huge R&D budgets and all the rest of it doing that sort of transformation thing. But there's an extraordinary ecosystem of micro enterprises, often geographically based, who are part of the stuff of community as well. So if we're looking at circularity, within a sustainable development model, there's really exciting possibilities there, but easy to overlook how we enable and support those. But some interesting ideas. Some of the things that you suggested related about finance to enable this to happen. And our next intervention comes from someone who knows a lot about finance as the governor of the Bank of Finland. Mr. Olli Rehn, delighted that you're with us. Also had quite a period, I think, within the European Commission, Vice President of the European Commission 2011 to 2014. We hear so much about the fiscal environment, both in terms of public finance and in terms of private finance, and that fusion that encourages innovation and transformation towards circularity, but also shouldn't be investing in the things that are non-circular. Very interesting to have one or two of your observations about the state of the enabling environment, particularly related to the fiscal side of things.
Thank you very much for the invitation to this event. While this is the third such event, the things we talk about here are necessarily not all that new. But what is new is that the talks have started to materialize in actions taken by companies, as we heard from Jana and Zeenat and Albina already, and not only by individual companies, but they are in fact becoming increasingly mainstream in the corporate sector and in enterprises. And that's indeed the good news. But we have challenges, as we know, and I start with a broader brush, and I focus then on finance and central banking and fiscal issues. What we need is action at the global level, because in an ideal world, a unified global carbon tax would be the first best optimal solution, since that would make companies internalize the externalities of emissions. That would also provide a level playing field across the globe. Carbon tax in the real world we live in, this is being challenged by issues related to measuring emissions and also very much issues related to the realpolitik of some larger jurisdictions. Taxation can be used to create the right incentives even without a unified global tax. Citra has recently published a report that is detailing how an environmental tax reform could reduce emissions while creating many benefits for the economy and employment. The new government program of Finland released today is based on these principles. Globally, several ministers of finance have joined their forces in what is called the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action to consider issues such as environmental tax reforms. Likewise, a number of central banks and supervisors have joined their hands in the network for greening the financial system, of which the Bank of Finland, for instance, is a member. In the European Union and globally, the financial sector still lacks adequate instruments for mainstreaming green finance. The European Commission, through its plans for a capital markets union and sustainable finance action, is working on this. Climate-related criteria should be better reflected in the key tools that are used for decision-making by market participants. I'm referring to, for instance, benchmarks and credit ratings, which direct decisions in the financial markets. More work needs to be done also on how companies can cost-effectively and reliably indicate the sustainability of their business operations. But for all companies planning their future, now it is really the time to think deep about how to transform their business models sustainable and turn these plans into concrete actions. Not least because there is a paradigm shift going on, which I witness almost every day. There is a paradigm shift in the sentiment of the investor base, which is starting to affect the selection of companies that attract investments and funding in the future. I know this firsthand also because this is what we do in the investment policy of the Bank of Finland. So, dear friends, let me conclude. As I said, environment and climate conscious business models are becoming increasingly mainstream. That's fine, but the transition should be much speedier, much quicker. And therefore, I want to encourage us all to recognize the urgency of concrete climate action and build a timely and consistent transition path towards the sustainable circular economy, both in the public sector and in the private sector, in the businesses and in the financial industry. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Governor Wren, for those very wise words. And what we see already happening, as you mentioned, is that investors and also insurance companies are now already beginning to become picky about how they support companies. And in a way, they're pushing for a greater responsibility and a greater engagement of companies in what needs to be done. And so with regard to your urgency of action, it seems to me that this could be a very good way of creating an urgency of action by getting the finance sector even more involved in pushing for this kind of change. So I don't know, Peter Barker of the World Business Council of Sustainable Development, would this be something that would help move the needle faster if the finance sector was to be more involved? Given that we also have to think in terms of job creations, and we've heard this coming out from Zenith as well as Albina Ruiz about the importance of job creation in the context of circularity. How do we link these dots, the finance sector, the need to create different opportunities, and planetary challenges to bring about greater sustainability in businesses?
And all that in 5 minutes, right?
And we give you 7 minutes if you need for your wise words.
Well, let me first say it's great to be back in Helsinki. And the reason I say that, there's a magazine called Monocle, which has titled Helsinki the best city in the world for the last I don't know how many years. And you know that you're onto something when Monocle, in their morning brief, which is called the Monocle Minute, opens with an article this morning called Full Circle, saying 2,000 people today will meet in Helsinki, those are all of you, and we wish them the following. Circular economy has become a buzzword. Please can these 2,000 people, all of you in the room, make it a reality now, because the world urgently needs it. So thanks for having me in Helsinki. There's plenty of examples, and I'm sure many came across today. Fiskars gave their, I can now have vintage tableware. Renault has battery leasing. IKEA was here this morning, I believe, are beginning to lease their furniture. There's Philips with lighting as a service, because people don't want to buy lamps, they need light. And these are examples, but my fear is none of these examples are scaling up fast enough. So let me give you my 3 thoughts of what scale could actually mean. First, I think we need more specificity, move beyond the buzzwords. Secondly, we need to be much tougher on how do we actually measure ourselves. And thirdly, we need to be very bold on pricing, linking it back into the finance world. So let me give you a few sound bites on each of them. Circular economy is almost like sustainability. You know, we all talk about it. We all talk a pretty good talk about it. But do we really know what it is and how to get it done? So what I mean with specificity is we probably need by sector and by value chain a specific analysis of what would a true circular economy mean for the automotive or for the food or for any other sector. Because there are going to be very different challenges and different solutions in the different spaces. Turn it into a license to operate type of conversation, as has recently happened in the plastics business. Yeah. You know, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation a few years ago was the plastics economy, leading thought-leading work. It took Attenborough to make a movie, and then it took a whale in Thailand to die after having swallowed 8 kilos of plastics for this to become a global emergency. Now you have the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, more than $1 billion on the table from private sector to find solutions. So license to operate on a specific topic can help scale. We need to get much tougher on ourselves in measuring this. There are 0 sustainability reports of companies today that have credible disclosures on how circular their models are. We don't have a language. You know, you were talking about climate change. We have a greenhouse gas protocol. The Financial Stability Board has given us the TCFD. What is that in circular economy? It doesn't exist. So in the World Business Council, we've now started a piece of work called the Circular Metrics Framework, which will actually allow business to measure and eventually disclose. And even though not all of them will like it, in the end of the day will be held accountable for their performance, because that's all that ever really works. On pricing, I would have hoped Olli would have said this. Maybe you did refer to it, but in Finland there is some leading work going on. There is a roadmap here in Finland to get to circularity. An organization called Xtax, as part of that roadmap, has done an analysis, how can we move tax system away from labor into resourcing, i.e. make it more expensive to use resources, make labor cheaper so that circularity, reuse becomes cheaper, more jobs will be created. Incredibly interesting outcomes. 6% increase in GDP, 1.2% in GDP and jobs, 6% decline in greenhouse gas emissions. So in taxation, there's a real thing we can do, which is, you know, a pricing solution, which will then link into capital markets, lower the cost of capital, get more funds to invest, get the scale to flow. So 3 things, get specific, measure ourselves, and get it into the pricing. That will get us towards scale. My last 2 seconds is, please let's not be comfortable with all our little pet projects and pilots. This is a global emergency. 9% of the resources the world uses today are being reused in circularity. 91% are just straight out into the waste bin. It's a ridiculous scandal. It's 30 years that we're on this agenda. We need to scale this up. We need to think system transformation, and we must go faster. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for those comments and throwing that gauntlet down. And what we want to do is to really partly pick that up through this forum and a little bit through the discussion. So we're going to shuffle the pack now a little bit to open up the discussion. Mr. Wren, I think you have to leave us. Probably the day that a new Finland government is formed is a day where the governor of the bank probably has a few things on his agenda.
It's a high season in our
but we've got a 2-for-1 swap. So thank you for being with us. And if Jens Potočnik and Jocelyn could join us, that would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You didn't sing.
I didn't.
So, there we are. We are an enhanced panel, and in a moment we're going to open up a bit of a conversation between ourselves about the journey forward. But first of all, great to have you with us, Jos Blériot from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, very much involved in the kind of connections, international institution and government liaison, really trying to push the message, help people understand how we can find solutions. You've heard some stories from a number of our panelists. Our driving ambition is to create the best enabling environment for circular businesses fast. Interested both from the experience of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, but also perhaps from what you're picking up in this panel and this forum on some initial thoughts about creating that environment.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and thanks to all the speakers for the interesting insights. I think the first thing that is clear is that there is willingness to move, there is desire to go forward on this issue, and it's quite transverse. I mean, it's not only one sector, one industry, it's the public sector as well. It's institutions, so it seems that there is something there, there's momentum, but there's also a need for scale and speed, and as we've seen, it raises some really big questions. The thing is that an economic model shapes the society in which it operates usually. And at the moment, the current model really is hardwired for and by linearity. So if we think that we're going to move from linear to circular just because we decide to go from red to blue, actually it's not a level playing field. There's a lot of strata of legislation, practices, incentives within companies, within governments, that actually drive linearity by nature. So it's skewed already. So there is a lot to unpack, and there is a lot to understand there in terms of how we create the value. And currently, the value is created through extraction and depletion. How do we move away from that? That also raises a big question about the underlying values of our system, with an S this time. And circular economy really is about feedstock, it's about processes, and it's about business models. It's about designing waste and pollution out of the system. It's about keeping the materials and component in circulation at high value. And it's also about restoring natural capital and regenerating ecosystems. And these are three big things. So can we really think that these can be simply slotted into the existing model? Can we think we're going to just repaint it and not touch the infrastructure or the underlying assumptions that we have? I mean, just think about business models. And you were talking about the going to a service model and moving from consumers to users. That might be true that we're moving to users here, but where the bulk of the consumption is happening and is about to happen, that's really not the case. They tend to go for more linearity as they get more affluent as well, and that's an issue in itself. Now, if you want to go to a business model whereby your assets and your products are your material banks, what does that mean in terms of accounting rule? What does it look like when you have stock on your balance sheet? Is that a positive? Is that a negative? All these things actually don't, at the moment, conduce to more circularity, and these things need to be challenged in a way. So again, we can't be too naive, and it's not a simple question of choosing one way over the other. Do we do more business as usual, or just because we know that circularity has potential and is needed, do we just flick the switch and go there? No, there's a massive co-creation process that we need to put in place. And that needs, of course, collaboration. You've both picked up on this, and I don't think anybody would disagree on this. But the co-creation, getting all the stakeholders around the table, yes, there's a lot of work, but that's the exciting bit, is that we can shape it in the way we want. If everybody has a role to play around that table, and this co-creation process, really, I have to hand it to Yannis as well when he created the European Resource Efficiency Platform in 2012. By intent, this was a multi-stakeholder process, and the reason why the outcome that we see is, of course, it's not sufficient, but the Circular Economy Action Plan and what Europe has achieved is also to put to the credit of that multi-stakeholder initiative, because everybody could co-create rather than have this usual, let's go to a lowest common denominator and see what happens. So I know Yannis has a lot to say on legislation, but I think, for me, the real message is, there is drive, there is momentum, but if we don't touch the boundary conditions, if we don't open the discussions on the fundamentals, then we're still in a linear system.
Thank you.
That's excellent, but tell me, if you need to get specific, we've heard about specificity, we've heard about pricing. Now you're talking about fundamental system-wide changes. Now, all of that needs to come together in the context of a more collaborative system, in the context of co-creation. Yanis, is this all possible, or is this all a pipe dream? Are we just reinventing new words, or can it all come together? And you've been a thought leader in this, so share with us some of your wisdom.
Thanks. Circular, by definition, should be more cooperative, inclusive, collaborative, and transparent, or it will not happen, by definition. So I think it's not the question yes or no, it's just the question how. But we have seen that very clearly also there on the slide. But I'm not entirely sure if we would ask only the business people that we would get the same order of the thickness of those things which were on the screen, but absolutely I would subscribe to that. And it would be difficult not to agree with many of the things which were shared by the panel. Importance of the financial system, it's essential. Digital and circular, it's essential. We didn't actually talk a lot about that, but it's pretty much essential. I think it will be the major driver if we talk it from the business perspective. And what, Peter, you said about data and measuring, I also believe that that's pretty much essential, because this is bringing us to the thing which, Jos, you actually opened, and for me that's pretty much the bottom line of the story which we have to address. So if you look how we are today measuring the economic development, well-being, if you are measuring through the GDP, you get one picture. If you are measuring it through the, for example, Wealth Inclusive Index, last year the UNEP published that report on that, and it's, in short, it's saying something like that: growth of GDP and to a certain extent also of the social capital in the past decades has been achieved on the cost of depleting natural capital, full stop. So if you look to the curves, you basically very clearly see where the things are going, which is bringing you to the central question: how should we better align the incentives which we are giving to the business sector with the regulation? Because if we are saying to the business sector currently still, if you pollute more, your profits will be higher, and then we say from the public, no, 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 that's wrong, and then we establish the regulation which is sending us in different direction. Of course we have a problem. Of course with that regulation we create innovation incentives, but we also create a kind of a conflict field in which those interests meet in different ways. So I firmly believe in some of the things which were also shared. Internalizing externalities on global level would be essential. Taxes, it's relatively difficult, but needs to be addressed. But I will never understood why subsidies and public procurement is not used, because it's simple. And it just makes a bit of courage that you take some of the decisions which go against the incumbents there on the market. But it's essential and it's simple. And I will never understand why we have never really used those tools more strongly. Quality enhancement standards, absolutely. These are some of the things which we need. But one thing which I would really like to draw the attention. We have to stop with this, I will just say it bluntly, obsession of deregulation, including in European Commission. Because it is a role of public officers and also of the policymakers to create fair and level playing field. And what business really hates, it's unfairness, free riders, uncertainty. And that's exactly what is the role of a public policy maker. They should be bold, and they should create rules which will be responsible to the broader society. The last point which I want to do is on governance, because we haven't talked a lot about governance, but I think that the governance it's also pretty much essential part of the game. On a higher level, you can establish better it is. Yeah. That's why global is the best. If you have it on European Union level, it's much better than if you have it on national level, obviously. But in the times when society and also economies are, for the first time, so much interconnected and interdependent, We need more of, if I use the word circularity, also in the global governance, so more of the sharing of the sovereignty and less of the owing sovereignty. It's essential if we want to drive the world into the right direction and if we want to create the things which are sustainable for all of us. And what should be the role of European Union, or better to say Europe, in that respect? You know, in the world which we see around, we can hardly imagine that Europe would be a kind of a center of the world or a world leader. But what we should do, I think we should do everything to remain the center of the dream of the world, of the people. And that includes the developments in the circular economy. It is our responsibility. We live in a society where we understand sometimes some things better than some others, or at least the development in democracy, rule of law, then responsibility via environment, then culture, then all those things do create a kind of responsibility which we have to bear, and that's why I'm really happy that that it's so much power behind the development of the circular economy model, because I firmly understand it as a kind of new economic model which is trying really to align our intentions with the commitment which we have done in Sustainable Development Goals.
Very good. Let me open up this conversation. Both of you have put up some very interesting ideas on the table, but let me pick up some of those and engage with all of you, and maybe I turn to Jana first, because what we heard Josh say, for example, is we have to design out waste. We have to design out also some of the assumptions of linearity, but also design in new innovations. Design in innovations, not new innovations, but innovations. How does Fiskas deal with all of this in the transition to circularity?
Well, lasting design, kind of having durability and quality, something that you want to look at years and years and decades to come, has always been kind of a starting point. But obviously, now when the circularity comes after centuries of linear model, so it's an afterthought. Now we take what we have and try to figure out how to do it best and adjust into the circular economy. The next step, which is obviously already ongoing, is that you have to take into account already in the first design phase that what will be the recyclability, what's the reusability, what kind of material, how you plan for the recycling or the circular economy, because now it's an afterthought. We try to do the best what we have. So it needs to be embedded in the design of the product, services, whatever it is. So that's a change for all the companies. And that's where the collaboration also comes in, because none of us have all the answers, as said. Yeah. So you get the startups, you get the great ideas, and we have the power and the money. So this is kind of, as was said earlier, so how you combine those things, the great ideas, us with a little bit more muscle and do it together.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask another question, then turn it to Peter. Albina Ruiz, you have both the experiences of an environmental activist as well as a policymaker now. And you heard Yanis say that you need to align regulation with market incentives in order to create that change. And he specifically referred to even public procurement in this kind of market transformation. What kind of support do you get, say, within government to have this conversation across the different ministries to bring about this kind of change and this alignment?
Yeah. Peru, as a member country in the Pacific Alliance, together with the Republic, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico, we are negotiating the content of the environmental chapter that will be included in the Pacific Alliance treaty with the associated countries, with the objective of promoting trade policies and environmentally mutually supportive, and improve countries' capacity to address environmental issues related to investment or trade, including trade cooperation. This chapter recognizing that the transition to a circular economy can bring environmental and social benefits. along with long-term economic competitiveness and prosperity. In addition, on July 6, on the occasion of the 14th Presidential Summit of the Pacific Alliance, a declaration of the sustainable management of plastic will be signing, which will be open to the adherents of the observer states, and whose purpose is to develop and implement new policies, strategies, programs, and global, regional, national, and local projects integrated to sustainable consumption and production initiatives to promote the integral management of plastic through their life cycle, reduce the use of plastic of a single use, diminish the presence of the plastic waste in the ecosystem, and prevent the contamination by microplastic, advancing towards a circular economy. On the other hand, we believe that the added value in the products that are generated by applying circular economy could access benefits that promote trade between countries, for example, or promoting a special regulation for the promotion of sustainable public procurements in the countries, or putting on the market a seal or certification as a differentiating elements. It is also important that, along with intervention in the public policies on the countries, they are accompanied by communication campaigns that encourage responsible consumption and bring citizens closer to circular products and their benefits.
Thank you. Yep.
Interesting. And there's something that's, interesting hearing some of those examples and those initiatives being taken. I'm drawn back, Joss, to what you said, and it's something that's leaving me uncomfortable here, and I think I want to come back. It's the big question, because one of the interesting things is as we travel on the journey towards circularity, we actually, I think, realizing it's bigger, it's more fundamental. The system can't comfortably just absorb this shift. And I just wanted to get one or two comments, maybe from Peter initially. It feels as though we're onto something fundamental and very big here, and it's taken us a little while to work it out. And it's about, what are we about? What as societies are we about? And I note that New Zealand, for example, has just said, hey, we want an index of well-being. France tried it a few years ago, but maybe that was before its time. And so we're moving away from the growth, jobs and growth at all costs, to the idea of a regenerative, a collaborative economy. But that is a fundamentally different business model. And I just want some either encouragement or thoughts as to whether we can actually pull off that transition to a new model, or whether the revolution is too significant and the vested interests in the model as we have it are too great that in about 10 years' time we'll realize we were doomed, we couldn't do it. The interests were too great to stop it. So I'd love to have some encouragement from yourselves, but I sit here, having been doing this stuff for 35 years, feeling gloomier, not more optimistic. So encourage me forward. I don't know whether you want to add anything, Joss, or Peter, you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, just a quick one. Of course, it's big, but that's the exciting bit. We can see the next cycle and redesign and move away maybe from growth as a blunt instrument and go for prosperity and regenerative, whatever you call it, economic development, and really create the things that will allow the economy to thrive and be resilient. That's the interesting bit. Now, of course, if you stop short at that and just say, it's big, therefore it's too difficult, nobody will do it. But if you say it's big, and those vested interests that are in the system at the moment become the vested interest of the next system, then of course if we agree on a perspective, then it's a case of breaking it down one by one and saying, I would like to go for that specific circular business model, but this is what stands in my way at the moment. Can we work on that? And if we don't do that post-mortem, or if we don't do that analysis, then it's not going to happen. This is why it's so fundamental also for the private sector to say, this is what I'd like to do, and this is why I can't do it at the moment. And not just say, I want a free pass, I want this, I want that. But in the light of the agreed upon perspective, the desired outcome, as soon as there's agreement on that, we can work towards how do you backcast, how do you make it happen, how do you retro-engineer that.
Okay, Peter, do you want to?
Not saying it's easy.
No, right.
No, I think anyone who works in the sustainability space is always on the edge of pure depression, you know. It's so easy to go home and feel really happy that you sat in the room and listened to these speakers and at the same time conclude, wow, this is too big to handle. I always come back to the same thing. The accountants will save the world. That's it. It's bad news for anyone who's in sustainability, but accountants will do it. So we must get to these metrics and we must have a conversation. What is value creation in a circular economy? Because, I mean, there's pretty tough questions out there. You know, I kind of hope Janos is not giving up his fire when he says tax is too hard, let's not touch it.
No, because that's what I didn't say.
The circular economy means that, you know, if we want to be successful in the circular economy, we need to drive resource productivity. If that's going to be the major driver of productivity in the economy, let's tax that. The big problem for business, you know, and I represent business here, is if you really think through circular economy, it means selling less. We don't need 12 suits in our cupboard. 1 or 2 will do, thank you. But somebody is selling these suits to us and making a profit out of them. How do they create value when they sell less? So yeah, it's incredibly hard, but I think if we really have honest conversations, pricing, externalities, true value creation, that's where we find the answers.
Okay.
Yeah, just
Yanis,
wanted to clarify.
You wanted to,
Good. No. Of course, I'm in favor of changing taxes. I'm preaching that 10 years. But I'm just saying what is easier and what is more difficult. It's really easy if you're a policymaker to change subsidies, and it's really easy to change because it's to change the public procurement because it's just one step. While making the system different, it's more difficult. But just concerning the role of the ministers of finance, I think it's ridiculous because they are judged by society, also by us, by how well they keep the budget aligned. And that's ridiculous, really, because they would need to be judged totally on different circumstances, how they are actually creating and putting incentives that the real change are done in economic system. But Peter, I have very good news for you concerning the optimism and the question. Circular economy and all the changes which we are talking will happen because it's inevitable.
Right. I'm encouraged. Thank you.
Okay.
Jana, do you want to?
Yeah, maybe a couple of words. It's somehow it feels a little bit funny talking about it here because we are preaching to the converted. We all know it already, and we are here because we believe in it. So, and at the same time, I guess I'm naive or optimist. So I do believe that it's possible to do, and it requires big change, like you say, Peter. But at the same time, it starts with one. Every single one of us need to believe in it, do something, and there's a big revolutions made by one having an idea and you get the crowd around you. So I guess my point is that it can be done just one by one, we get the size of it.
Zina, do you want to come in on this, or I'm going to take you to some of the comments there? Go ahead.
I just wanted to, sort of comment on how much we need. And connected to what was said a little bit earlier about there are places in this world where a lot has not yet been done, and there needs to be done. I mean, if you look at countries like mine, I mean, they say 2/3 of our infrastructure is yet to be built. So, so yes, I think both these things, these two worlds need to come together. They need to converge on what is enough and what needs to be enough. And I think when we talk about social floors, we should also be talking, and planetary boundaries, I think there's a consumption floor and there's a consumption ceiling, which needs to be established, and both these things need to come together. And from the good news for our countries, where we are going to be consuming more in the future, in the near future, is that we are at an opportune time to start the design of those models that are that are circular by design. Unlike coming at the end, we can start looking at products that have longer life, that are going to be reusable. And if I look at my own sector, maybe moving away gently, maybe more aggressively, from mineral-based to bio-based. Maybe that is the world going forward, a variety that could be brought in, from being just the same kind to many more, so that there is much less pressure on the kind of services or constructions that we are doing. So there is going to be innovation at that place that we need, which I don't think is being driven right now. Our innovation is really going to the large scale, because we still believe in economies of scale, of production of large units which are non-reusable without adding more energy to refurb, to reconstitute or remanufacture. And I think we need to start thinking much more modular, much smaller, much more circular within itself. That's one. The other point that I think we need to start seeing is circularity not just within food, within agriculture, within textile, but circularity across sectors. And so industry, power sector to construction sector, agriculture to something else. And I think we need to see how these streams come together. We see it in the small-scale sector in housing today in India. In pockets, we see fly ash from power sectors contributing to building materials. In that, we see agro-waste contributing into building material. So I think there are intersectoral collaborations that are required, and that would need a lot more collaboration than just within different stakeholders in the same sector.
Exactly so, and that brings us to the discussion that or the point that you brought up, Peter, which is about looking more specifically at sectors and how these sectors could be redesigned or not, but also in terms of the collaborativeness within it. But you just raised a point which I wanted to get some thoughts from any of our speakers on consumption ceilings and consumption floors. Now, is that something we can think about in the context of sectors? Would that make us more inclusive as a longer-term project, or is that a taboo we should not be talking about? What do you think? I'm putting you on the spot. Consumption ceilings, consumption floors. Do we need that, or we don't need that?
No, I firmly believe that going as far as the resource efficiency, it's not enough. That sooner or later we will have to seriously discuss resource efficiency. Right. It's a very difficult debate, very difficult. But by the way, when we look to the Global Resource Outlook, the report which IRP has recently published, we can see that concerning material footprint, the high-income countries are consuming approximately 13 times more per capita than low-income countries. So it is obviously that one figure is too low and the other figure is too high, and that convergence you are talking about needs to happen. And those are, of course, difficult questions, and any who was in policy making knows that nobody likes the discussion about sufficiency because it's not a very comfortable discussion. They prefer somehow the debate about targets, not knowing that actually they are talking about sufficiency implicitly. But yes, this is a serious discussion. We can't avoid it, and we have to address it seriously.
So when you go into services, and Peter, maybe you want to, the moment you convert from products to services, does the sufficiency argument become less complicated politically?
Yeah, I think those are the examples that really shine. I think what is generally missing in the circular economy conversation is how do you really move consumer demand? I mean, there's interesting examples now coming out of the plastics where consumer demand or refusal to demand plastic bags or straws in fast food chains is much faster than the companies or the value chains are able to respond to. And I think we need to find those examples, really take the lessons out of it, because that's, in turn makes policymakers' life much easier to change regulation, puts incredible license to operate pressure onto businesses, and that changes systems. So I think we need to be a bit smarter, but we also need to invest more in what does it really mean? Because I don't believe in regulation. I believe there are consumer floors and ceilings, but regulating them, telling me how many whatevers I'm allowed to have is probably tough, but educating me, and that's where the specificity is needed. You know, what is the real challenge in plastic? What is the real challenge in a building or in the mobility solutions you choose? And companies are there, you know. The circular metrics, DSM is chairing that work for us. They are now going to measure how circular they are, and they will implement it into their internal decision making, leading to better product offerings to consumers, which if we then put the marketing dollars behind it, can really begin to change consumer demand.
It might be just interesting to have a comment from Jana, because so many of these events I'm at, suddenly the spotlight is, well, it's the consumer that actually makes the decision to purchase. And I'm just interested, you know, you are at that sharp end interface. Are you being drawn by the consumer into changing the way you do things? Or do you think you are shaping their thinking? Or is it a bit of both?
It's both, obviously,
right.
Because clearly we need to be on top of it and understand the consumer insights before we know them ourselves. So it's kind of, we try to get into your mind before you know what you are thinking. That's part of business, clearly, to be one step ahead. And at the same time, we need to listen carefully and follow the everyday and see what people are doing and anticipate the changes coming. So it's definitely both. Right. But here kind of the discussion as well that when we talk about level playing field, you often think about that having the same kind of expectations and structure for the business, but it's also about the people. If somebody like, you know, in Finland that has had prosperity for decades or centuries, and somebody who's barely, you know, dreaming of a bike, not about a car, it's not a level playing field. And who are we, you know, designing the world for? And that's also for the consumer, for us. You know, it's 7 billion people. It's not one way of answering it.
Yeah. Yanis, you just want to offer a comment on that?
Just saying, combining public procurement with that philosophy would work ideally. But one thing which I wanted to continue on where you ended, Peter, was it's not a coincidence that in plastics we have a major success and the things are moving very quickly. And I can tell you where the things would also happen very quickly if it would be politically put on the table in food waste. Because we as consumers feel guilty when we have this plastic constantly in our hands, when we see it, throw it away, and the same is with the food waste. So we could use and should use that kind of examples to expand the philosophy all across the field, because that's the easiest how you can actually get public support on your side, because it's easy to understand it and you can easily embrace it because nobody likes to feel guilty.
And maybe one word, as an engineer, plastic is not one thing. Yeah. And if we start talking about very specific, you know, avoid all plastic, that's a dangerous road. You have to have a lot of knowledge understanding what's in a plastic, and there might be wise uses that nothing can be, and it can't be kind of compensated with anything else. So it's just a word of caution, understanding what we're talking about. It's not one thing.
Indeed, these things are far more complex than we think they are. But let me ask the speakers to turn around. I don't know if you can see it there. If you have, okay, maybe you have better eyes than I do, or you can turn around and look at this. And you know, what really strikes me is that a lot of it is about values, not really about policy instruments. People are talking about values in order to change the system. What's your take on this? You know, how is it that we can work towards this? And you mentioned collaborative governance and collaborative global governance. And we heard from Albina Ruiz an example of how you were actually doing that through your regional alliances. Would that kind of a systemic change across the world also help us reinvent ourselves in terms of what is required for a circular economy to happen across the world, not just in individual countries?
Yeah, there's one clearly that jumps out here is, apart from the really nice one, which I thought it was an interesting way of answering the question, what should it be? It should be really nice. So yeah, that's really nice. I agree. I think we all do. All externalities included, and that pertains to the question that you were asking about should we have a consumption ceiling? Well, the reason why we have overconsumption is because it's so cheap, and there's a drive for things to be cheaper and cheaper. And why is it so cheap? It's because we don't pay the full cost, and that's pretty simple. So you don't have to necessarily go to the consumer and say, you should consume less, and by the way, I'm going to regulate that. Simply putting the taxation in the right place would, in a way, turn off the tap, because if producers are not incentivized to consume more and more and extract more regardless of the impact, then of course that's going to have an insight and an impact on the way they distribute and they give access to the service.
Just, it has been tried. We see it in France, for example, and you see a political movement against it. How do we deal with those political movements if we're also going to be dealing with planetary challenges? What is required there to bridge the gap? What's missing?
I think you're opening a conversation which is way too long for the 6 minutes that we have, unless you're going to allow me to have multiples of 5 minutes to answer it.
Okay.
No, but I think the situation you're referring to was sparked by a hike on price on one commodity that created a whole generation of discontent, which is now it's way past the boundaries of what it was in the beginning. But the thing is that if you only use one policy instrument and you don't compensate, then of course you're backing people into a corner. So that's where the fair and inclusive thing should happen. It's not only we're going to tax this now because it's a bad thing.
Right.
How can you actually work within that system? How can you maybe be compensated by cheaper public transport or anything like that? It needs to be a bit of give as well.
So I noticed compensation is not there in this list of things, which is rather interesting. Yeah. So maybe, yeah, go ahead.
I think it's in essence saying that the core problem and change it's in governance. Because if we talk about improving the governance, in particularly understanding that for the first time in the humanity, we are the generation which is living in ecological and social space of planetary scope. If we don't collaborate, if we are not cooperative, if we are not transparent, open, then the alternative is actually more conflicts and wars. And it's not difficult to choose, I think. But this is basically saying that. It's saying that we do understand the challenges which we have, and we can address them only in a better and more collaborative way, because there is no other way ahead.
Okay, so collaboration and collaborative has come out as the most important. So maybe we take a round. Peter, I don't know, my watch seems a bit slow, so we still have time?
I think you've just got time for a final message.
Exactly. So
each of us.
Let's be inclusive and focus on what the biggest one is there, which is collaborative. And let me turn to Albina and say, what would be your message in terms of collaboration? Let's just stick to this one message, and I will ask all the speakers to speak to the same one.
Yeah, I think our government needs to invest in the education. We need to transform the consumers. We need the responsible consumers. I think, like the people need to understand what is the role in the society. The government put the roles, the business needs changing too, but the most important is the responsible consumers. We have a power like a consumers.
Very good, responsible consumer.
Well, that pretty much took my words, but maybe one more thing when you said the values. So it's very value-based, and if you think about any company, there's a lot of science studies shown that value-based leadership is actually giving a successful company, and I certainly hope that would be also true for the government. Mm-hmm. So kind of getting the value-based thinking into the collaboration, as an example, I think that would help us.
Very good.
Yeah, if I were to focus on that one word, collaborative, I think it would be inclusive business models of the big that include the small. And the value really gets created from that job and the economic opportunity at that grassroots level. And it's a very difficult thing. I mean, we could, in a product, for example, say you have a secondary resource footprint of so much, or say we minimize virgin resource footprint by so much, minimize our embodied energy footprint by so much, which we can put numbers to it. But the percentage job creation of that product, it's a much more difficult measure. But I think that's where we need to get to, or the percentage local economy component of that product. I think we need to get to those measures as we go forward.
Yeah. Great. Peter?
So I'm going to combine collaborative and transparent, because I'm aware there's at least 4 initiatives, and I probably am blind to handfuls of others, where people are trying to decide what are the metrics to measure circularity. We should not compete on metrics. We need to collaborate on metrics, set a standard, and then compete on who has the best performance against them.
Excellent. Just, okay.
Innovation. Innovation, because I don't think we have all the policy instruments. We have some. We don't have all the materials even for a truly circular economy. If we use the feedstock that we have in circulation at the moment, well, some of it is not fit, and we don't have enough. So innovate on ways to collaborate as well. Innovate on the really at molecular level sometimes. Innovate on the policy instruments. We can use EPR, we can use eco-design, but that's only a start. They're not here. We can't rearrange the existing and think that it will get us to systemic change.
Thank you.
If you will ever get frustrated, remember just one thing. We are on the right side of the history. It gives a lot of energy. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Okay.
And wonderfully, we're on the right side of the clock as well, which is fantastic. Could we say a huge thank you to our panel for stimulating further thoughts? Great stuff.
Very good.
Just stay for a moment. One of the wonderful things about the World Circular Economy Forum is that we are aimed to create an enabling environment for you to collaborate. That starts in just a few moments outside. So we are going to transform the intensity of this conversation into the relaxation in the bar and in the areas behind. Some lovely music, some lovely food. Please, if I can encourage you one thing, collaboration is about talking to new people, not the same people. So enjoy your evening. We see you back here at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Great.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter.